All right, let's talk about deployment. How do I get this on the internet so other people can actually go ahead and start using it? Well, what we need to do first is get a couple things set up before we can move into any of the different ways that you could possibly deploy. And most of these ways that you deploy is having a Git repo. Even if it's not deploying via Git, having a Git repo is a great idea. So you might already have a Git repo or you might not. And if you have already cloned this one from GitHub, then great. You already have a Git repo. We'll talk about that in just a second. Don't skip this part because there's an important part we're going to have here. But if you don't, you do git init, and I made a new Git repo. And then we also want to make a git ignore file. So we're going to right click on our project and make a new file called .git ignore. And inside of your git ignore, we're going to write some files that need to be ignored, both by Git as well as some of these other deployment things. Also use your git ignore to tell it what not to actually upload. So if you are coming from an existing git ignore that you've cloned from GitHub, it will look like this. So you'll see something similar to this: node modules, dstore, log, idea, haters, variables at env, and some of this stuff. So what is this? Well, you don't want to put your node modules up on GitHub. It's huge. You can always get that by npm installing. dstore is just a Mac OS X file. Log is a log file that something might put onto your system that doesn't go into it. Ideas for weird people that use like WebStorm, something like that. Haters, just don't have them. And then we have our variables.env file. Why? Because your variables.env file should never, ever, ever go on any sort of version control, because it is specific to the system that you are on. Then I also did this little trickery to make sure that you could download a whole bunch of files by default, but if you were to add upload files, it would not go in there. Now, if we're deploying, we actually need to get rid of all of this here. So just select all that, get rid of that. So if you do not have a git ignore, now you do. And if you did have a git ignore, it looks exactly like this. One last thing, actually, we want to put variables.env.now. And I'll talk about that when we hit the now deployment videos as well. But make sure you add both of those. Good. Then you can go over here. You can type git status. And there's going to be all kinds of stuff. We don't have it hooked up to GitHub or anything like that just yet. That's fine. But we'll just do git add everything, git commit -m, call it app. And then we are up and running. You say git status, and you can double check that everything is good. All right, so that's what we have now. Next up, what we need to do is to get sort of all of our variables in order. If we open up our variables.env file, we're going to need, don't change this one just yet because this is for your local development, but you're going to need a version of all of these. That's going to be called production. Your database needs to be either you can use the existing database that you've had if that data is up, or if you have this as like a test database and you also want a production database, I recommend that you go ahead and create a second database if that's the case. So I'm going to be using MLab here just because I host all of my databases with MLab. I'm really happy with it, but you can use any other service, or if you're wise enough to create your own local database on your server, then you can go ahead and do that. I should caution you that if you are going to create your own MongoDB database, I know I've said this a few times, but you must set a username and password. By default, MongoDB does not come with a username and password, and you will get hacked. Then you have a mail user host port. I'm a big fan of using something called Postmark. And Postmark, there's all these services that provide what is called transactional email, where they just send one email at a time, and you need a service to actually do this. So Postmark has, I think they have like 10,000 free, something like that, or you sign up, you get a whole bunch of for free, and then it's just pennies to send once past that. So there's also like SendGrid, Mailgun, Mailbird, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of them. Postmark I've tried them all out, and I'm really happy with Postmark. Port, you're going to want to change that to 80 once we actually deploy it. Again, we'll see that. Map key, go ahead and get your own Google Maps key if you don't have one already. Otherwise, I don't know, you could probably keep that one until it stops working. Secret and sesh, we can leave those as is. Good. So don't change any variables in here, but you just need to know that you have to have all this stuff ready before you go ahead and start deploying. Unless you just want to like get it up and running and you're not actually worried about the mail, then you can leave it as your mail trap. Finally, we need to make some changes to our package.json that we have up and running. So we have our prod, watch, start, assets, sample, blow it all away. You saw another one called now down here. I've switched how that works, so I've taken that out. But what most of these things do is they actually run the npm start command in order to actually start it for us. And we were using the npm start command to run concurrently watch as well as run this assets. And we don't need to do either of those on our server. We don't need to watch it because we're not actually actively developing it. We are going to use something called forever though. And then we also don't need care about assets because we're not recompiling. We don't need to compile our JavaScript or anything on the server. So what start should be renamed to is called dev. And now, let me just tell you, if you ever want to run it now locally, it's not npm start, it's npm run dev. And that's how you're going to actually run your application from here on out. So you see it just kicked up and it's now running for me. I'm going to kill that. And then there's also this one called prod. I want you to rename that to start. Why? Because that's how you actually start your application normally without any of this like run, watch, and assets and webpack and everything. We just want to start our application, which is as simple as calling node start.js. Okay, cool. So we've done that. And now let's get into moving into some of the actual different deployment scenarios.